Okay, the 747 and orbiter are coming into view now.
There you go.
Come on back. Slow.
Tell you what, you set up stalls if you want to control the weather. Let's get the cars. They were over there when he was over there. They didn't have a bed.
The OSS-1 payload, which is primarily what we're going to be talking about this morning, flies in March. The Kennedy Space Center is responsible for the preparation and the launch of the shuttle and the payload. Our plan is to increase the frequency of the missions, to do them more efficiently. So part of our task has been not only to develop the hardware and the software, but also the methodologies and the cooperation which is required between centers. And so this is a rather center-wide effort with heavy involvement of all the centers, and the methodologies of working together and accomplishing this is part of the task that we have been faced with.
The crawler transporter will be transporting the vehicle to the pad at approximately 1 mile per hour. The complete journey to the pad will take approximately 5.5 hours, with an additional hour and a half needed before the mobile launch platform is hard down. Hard down is a term used by the engineers to describe the mobile launch platform being completely supported by the pedestals on the pad and no longer exerting any pressure on the crawler transporter.
I think that this is something that's really good for America. And I'm really grateful and I'm gratified to see how the American people have come and stood behind this program, how they're rallying to the front. I think it's been a real boost to our national spirit. I think it's caused us to renew our patriotic spirit. And I'm told that there are more people coming to this launch than for any launch in history. And that's really gratifying to both of us.
We're really ready to do it on time, on schedule for the full duration next week. And we hope to be able to express some of our excitement to you and bring you some pictures via TV, certainly after the flight, and tell you how it is to fly that magnificent machine that we have ready to go out on the pad, the Columbia. Thank you very much for welcoming us here to Florida this morning. Thanks again.
This is Shuttle Launch Control. T-minus 2 hours, 5 minutes and holding. Despite the fact that we're in a hold, there are many activities continuing to go on. In the astronaut quarters, Commander Jack Lousma and Gordon Fullerton have just sat down for their traditional breakfast of steak and eggs and orange juice. However, in the case of Gordon Fullerton, the pilot, he will not be having the eggs and steak. He will be having breakfast cereal instead. Jack Lousma, who is serving as commander for this flight, was one of the 19 astronauts selected by NASA in April of 1966. He served as a member of the astronaut support crew for Apollo 9, 10, and 13. And on July 28, 1973, he was launched aboard a Saturn 1B as the pilot for the Skylab 3 crew. His crew logged a total of 1,427 hours and 9 minutes in space, setting a new world record for a single mission at that time. He also spent 11 hours and 2 minutes outside the spacecraft in 2 separate EVAs, or extravehicular activities. He's a colonel in the Marine Corps. Gordon Fullerton became a NASA astronaut in September of 1969, following the first landing on the moon. He is a member of the astronaut support crews for Apollos 14 and 17, and was also a member of the 2-man crews who piloted the shuttle orbiter Enterprise on the approach and landing test during 1977. Fullerton is an Air Force colonel. Both astronauts are married. Lousma has 3 children and Fullerton 2. Astronauts checking the weather by looking out of the window in the breakfast room. They will be receiving a breakfast or a weather briefing during the breakfast period and in the astronaut quarters. Following breakfast, they'll be moving down to the suiting room where they'll put on their flight suits and then begin the trip to the launch pad. Liftoff of STS-3, the third flight of the Space Shuttle, is expected at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning. The countdown at T-minus 2 hours, 5 minutes and holding. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
And now Jack Lousma coming out and waving to the crowd. In addition to the KSC workers, there is also the press photographers who are assembled, and watching them climb into the vans along with the cooling equipment that they carry to keep their suits cool while they are on the ground. This will be the longest of the shuttle missions to date. The first two were about 54 hours in length. This one will be 7 days in length and will double the time that we have on the airframe of the orbiter. This is Shuttle Launch Control at T-minus 2 hours, 5 minutes and holding. The astronaut van has come up the ramp to the pad surface. At the pad, and permission has been given by the orbiter test conductor and the NASA test director for the crew to enter the orbiter. T-minus 45. We're 14 seconds away from switching command of the countdown from the ground computers to onboard computers. The development flight instrumentation recorders are on. T-minus 33 seconds and counting. The GOX vent arm is fully retracted, and we're switching control of the countdown to the onboard computers. T-minus 25 seconds. The sequencer on the orbiter is now controlling the final seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 10. We are go for main engine ignition. 8, 7, 6. We have main engine ignition.
Houston, now control 8, mission control confirms roll maneuver started. 20 seconds, thrust looks good.
Roger, sounds good.
26 seconds, roll maneuver completed. 30 seconds, 1 nautical mile in altitude, throttling engines down now up to 68% as programmed. 38 seconds, flopboard status looks good, mission control. 42 seconds, Columbia now 3 nautical miles in altitude. 46 seconds, coming up now to create a maximum aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. 55 seconds, pass through max Q, still looking good. Throttling engines back to 100%. Give it a go at throttle up.
Columbia, Houston, you're go throttle up.
Mark 1 minute 10 seconds. Columbia now 7 nautical miles in altitude, 4 nautical miles downrange. Velocity now reading 2,700 feet per second.
Roger, 460.
Mark 1 minute 25 seconds. Columbia now 11 nautical miles in altitude, 8 nautical miles downrange.
We got a free on loop line here. Roger, we're looking.
Jack Lousma reporting a free en route light. 1 minute 40 seconds. Coming up on negative seats where altitude is too high for ejection seat use.
Columbia, Houston, negative seats.
Negative seats. Mark 1 minute 55 seconds. Columbia now 21 nautical miles in altitude, 19 nautical miles downrange.
CC 50, Houston.
2 minutes 2 seconds. Standing by for solid rocket booster separation confirmation.
Okay, there's 103.
2 minutes 15 seconds. Confirm solid rocket booster separation.
Roger, Columbia, we confirm guidance converged.
2 minutes, 23 seconds. Onboard guidance is converging as programmed. Columbia is now steering for a precise window in space for main engine cutoff.
So after about 45 minutes, we were in orbit and able to open the payload bay doors.
If you look quickly, that's Los Angeles, the South Bay, Palos Verdes Peninsula, then on down to San Diego. Then a few seconds later, that's the Salton Sea and the Imperial Valley in California, which greeted us as we opened that first payload bay door.
The site was as spectacular for us as it was for you, and as you see it in these pictures here. It was truly a momentous event for us, and most impressive. The pictures and the memories don't do it justice. You just have to go back and do it again in order to appreciate it fully. The morning of the first day was when we first got the remotely controlled arm made by the Canadians into business.
Second day, actually, Jack, if you remember. And Jack had discovered some tile missing out in front of the windshield. If you notice those square, irregular patches in front of the windshield, those are actual missing white tile. So we moved the arm up and got it over to the right-hand side and looked along on a kind of a grazing angle here, but had a view and found some more tile missing. However, those were relatively insignificant. As it turned out, on entry, I've heard the number that the highest temperature noted on the top in the area of the missing tile was only 140 degrees or so.
Actually, the tile didn't slow us down much. We knew that lots of people would be concerned about it, and so we erased it from our thought and went on to do the other business. We did have some venting from one of the main engines that was with us for about 2 to 3 days, which we reported, and it was determined what the venting was. This is the way it looked, however, when the sunlight shone on it with a dark background. And as I mentioned, after about 2 or 3 days, it went away.
Now an inside shot. I'm at the manipulator operator station, and Jack has taken this movie right here as I brought the plasma diagnostics package out of the payload bay for the first time. We put the manipulator arm through the loaded operations, that is, with an attached payload for the first time in its ever, and exercised all the very complex sequences that the manipulator arm has built into it. Some of those involve manually positioning the arm, others with the software doing it automatically, and our job merely to monitor for safety considerations. We operated the arm night and day, so when the sun went down, we turned on lights in the payload bay and found that they were adequate to see it visually as well as operate our television system.
We had a number of experiments in the cabin to take care of. This is the plant growth unit that operated perfectly through the entire mission. We would read the temperature in the 6 plant growth compartments 3 times a day and read those back to the ground. One of the things that you'd all enjoy is the ability to manage packages very readily and easily up there. No need to set anything down, you just leave it float in space. Finally came time to come home, so we got the payload bay doors closed and got a wave off for mission control. But finally the next day they decided they'd bring us in anyway. And
30,000 feet. Everything looking good. Airspeed 285.
Intersecting the hack now, passing 26,000. Looks good.
2.5 minutes to touchdown. Turning right now into runway 17 at 20,000 feet. Airspeed 295. Range 10 miles.
Two copy lines, Houston.
Airspeed
Columbia, Houston,
275.
go for auto to enter glide slope.
Go for auto at 12,000 feet.
Okay, we're on auto, Houston.
Columbia now in auto land. Out at 10,000 feet at 288.
flare, Houston.
Roger.
1,000 feet. Airspeed 292. Still in auto.
50 feet, gear coming.
Comes the gear.
Gear down. 20. 10, 5, 4, touchdown. Nose gears 10. Nose gears 5, 4, 3, 3. Touchdown. Bienvenidos, amigos.
The mission elapsed time of touchdown, unofficially 8 days, 0 hours, 4 minutes, 49 seconds.
Okay, wheels are stopped, Houston.
Okay, Columbia, welcome home. That was a beautiful job.
As the Space Shuttle Columbia headed for orbit a second time, this country had itself a reusable space transportation system.
This is Shuttle Control. The unofficial touchdown time and mission elapsed time is 2 days, 6 hours, 13 minutes, 10 seconds.
10 days later, Columbia was flown back to the Kennedy Space Center, Florida, for the next flight. Astronauts Joe Engel on the left and Dick Truly piloted the second shuttle into space last November.
The big thing that we did, that we had said that we were going to do with this flight, was to prove the reusability of the space shuttle. For the first time, we reflew a spacecraft in an orbital mission. We also, in addition to that flight test and that reusability part of the mission, we also carried the first large payload on the space shuttle into space, a large group of Earth resources or Earth-looking experiments. And of course, the flight test of the Canadian-built remote manipulator system, the ARM. Those were the major parts of the flight.
The near-term plans are to try and make sure that as many of the things that Dick and I observed during our flight are implemented into both procedures and planning for not only Jack and Gordo's flight, which have been done, but for the follow-on flights.
The 154-foot-long external fuel tank that feeds 520,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen to the orbiter's 3 main engines has a new look beginning with this next flight. Gone is a quarter acre of white paint used on the first 2 external tanks. This change will allow future orbiters to carry an additional 600 pounds of payload. 46-year-old Jack Lousma from Grand Rapids, Michigan will command Space Shuttle 3.
This will be the third in a series of 4 test flights. And we're going to, on this flight, conduct primarily thermal tests. We're going to subject the Columbia to extremes of heating. And so for the first 30 hours, we're going to point the tail to the sun. And then we're going to swap ends, and for 80 hours, we're going to point the nose to the sun. And finally, we're going to point the top to the sun for 26 hours.
Jack Lousma logged more than 1,400 hours in space during the Skylab 3 mission.
It was 8 years ago that Al Bean and Owen Garrett and I flew on the second Skylab flight, and that was 59 days. So the obvious difference is that this is going to be a one-week flight as opposed to a two-month flight. I think the way that we plan for this flight is significantly different than we planned for the Skylab flight. In Skylab, we did our daily planning every night. Planning for that day's activities was all done on the ground the night before we were going to actually execute it. For this flight, of course, we have planned every activity in great detail before we go, so that we know on a daily basis exactly what we plan to do. So the vehicle, the duration, and the way that we plan are all different, but our basic training approach hasn't really changed much.
And that basic training has been varied and rigorous. Again, Jack Lousma.
Well, we've trained for a long time. Primarily, we use the shuttle mission simulator in Houston. And this, of course, is where we train for launch and for reentry and for on-orbit operations. We also have done a lot of training in the shuttle training aircraft, which is an actual flying Gulfstream II configured to fly like a space shuttle. And when we put it into the simulation mode, it can make approaches to a lake bed runway, and we can actually do the final phases of the landing of the space shuttle in a real-life flying simulator. So we've also trained in the water, of course, for the EVA. We have an extensive training program that has covered all of the areas of flight that we might be involved in. And of course, there are a lot of sit-down briefings by the scientific investigators and with the flight controllers. These are all training sessions, so it has covered the spectrum.
Astronaut Gordon Fullerton, 45, from Rochester, New York, will fly the right seat of Shuttle Columbia and serve as pilot for Flight 3. Fullerton already knows what it feels like to land a shuttle orbiter.
Well, in approach and landing tests, I was lucky enough to fly on 3 of the 5 free flights, which looked at the very last part of the entry profile of the space shuttle. When you start an entry, you start at Mach 25 and slow all the way down to a 0 as you roll to a stop on the runway. The approach and landing tests only started at Mach 0.6, so we only have flown through a very small part of the envelope. That is, I have only seen the last part. Those tests were very interesting, though. It was a test pilot's dream assignment to have a look at such a unique vehicle as the orbiter and how it flies in the atmosphere. And the test came out very close to what we had predicted on the simulations. And the first 2 landings from orbit confirmed that the data we found on those tests is the way it really flies after a re-entry from orbit.
We asked Gordon Fullerton to describe some of the planned experiments scheduled for Shuttle 3.
On orbit, we have a very busy timeline, and it'll keep us jumping for the entire 7 days. The primary activity centers around further tests of the remote manipulator system, the articulated arm that's used to maneuver payloads into and out of the payload bay. And we'll be doing extension of the tests that were begun on the last flight, picking up a couple of the test objectives which primarily looked at how the arm moves and whether it moves in the same manner as predicted by ground analysis. And then we'll proceed from there to pick up 2 instrumented packages and actually deploy them out away from the orbiter and then bring them back and rebirth them. We have a platform installed midway in the payload bay with an extensive array of scientific instruments that are primarily looking at phenomena involved with the upper atmosphere, that which we'll be flying through in orbit, and also some solar experiments.
That platform is made up of 9 scientific investigations sponsored by NASA's Office of Space Science and Applications, and it's called OSS-1. The OSS-1 payload includes experiments in plasma physics, astronomy, space technology, solar physics, and life sciences. The scientific package was assembled by the Goddard Space Flight Center. This is the actual flight hardware that will be used to study the effects of weightlessness on growing plants. The principal investigator is Dr. Joe Coles of the University of Houston. Research engineer Ron Mancini describes what they hope to learn.
He hopes to determine the effects on the production of lignin, which is a substance that stiffens plants. It's basically the binding bark-type substance that provides stiffness for the plant against gravity. And he's looking at the effect on the production of lignin due to the lack of gravity in space.
18-year-old Todd Nelson of Rose Creek, Minnesota, is the first of 10 high school students whose experiments have been selected for flight on the space shuttle. As part of the NSTA NASA Shuttle Student Involvement Project, Todd has worked closely with his sponsor, the Minneapolis Honeywell Corporation, who have helped him transform his winning proposal into a flight experiment. On Flight 3 of the shuttle, Todd plans to study the effects of weightlessness on insects in space. We asked him what he hopes to learn.
We hope to learn a lot from this experiment. And one of the reasons why it's important is because an experiment like this has really never been performed before. And this will enable us to actually perform research for other individuals to pick up on. And hopefully this project will be a stepping stone for all other research centered around the zero gravity aspect of insects in motion.
Future space shuttles will have on board small self-contained experiments, sometimes called getaway specials. This test canister without a payload is to be carried along on the third flight to check out the canister's resistance to everything from vibration to cosmic radiation. As many as 6 getaway specials each flight are available to industry, educational institutions, and to domestic and foreign governments. More than 320 reservations have already been made. For the people working in the Mission Operations Control Room at the Johnson Space Center, keeping tabs on Columbia's systems and crew is a 24-hour job, according to Orbit Flight Director Neil Hutchinson.
Of course, the responsibilities of the flight director position are the same as they've always been. We're basically the folks who are running the real-time operation in the Mission Control Center. After the vehicle lifts off from Kennedy, or very shortly after it lifts off, as soon as it's clear the tower, the responsibility for the conduct of the flights is transferred to Houston. And we have a group of folks, of course, in the control center that work with us and help us and the flight crew to execute the launch and the orbit portion and the re-entry portion of the shuttle missions.
Preparing for a shuttle flight requires practice, practice, practice. In space jargon, simulations, and there's no substitute. Again, Flight Director Neil Hutchinson.
Well, we have a system here at JSC that allows us to hook the Mission Control Center up with a simulator, which is nothing more than an orbiter cockpit with all of the systems and controls and displays, everything simulated. And we can actually practice malfunctions with the crew in the simulator and all the mission operations team, the flight control teams in the Mission Control Center. And we have a group of people who spend their life trying to make our life miserable by introducing failures, and we respond the way we would, or try to respond the way we would in flight. Now, we start that process for STS-3. We started that process in early December and have been operating 3 to 4 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day ever since that time, and will do that right up until flight time.
As Flight 3 of the Space Shuttle moves toward the final phases before launch, astronauts Jack Lousma and Gordon Fullerton made these observations.
Personally, I look forward to a great adventure. It's going to be the thrill of a lifetime when they light off the engines for that first liftoff. And then talking to my friends who have been there, the thrills don't stop and won't for the next 7 days. But more than that, it's going to be a very satisfying assignment from a professional standpoint. I've been a flight test for many years, and I think this has got to be the ultimate flight test experiment.
Well, I think the ultimate benefits of the space shuttle are identical to those that we've always
had for the entire space program. And of course, the main objective is to improve our quality of life here on Earth. And it always has been the objective of the program, and it always will be. And this is the major objective, I think, of the Space Shuttle. Up till now, we've been learning how to work in space and demonstrating that we could do it, and learning something about the unknown. Now we have the Space Shuttle, and we're able to exploit that knowledge and use it to our ultimate benefit. And I think that the benefits that we'll accrue will be of a higher percentage than we have in the past, simply because we have now learned how to work in space. We're going to stay close to the Earth and provide benefits for all the people. And I think that we need the Space Shuttle and the space program for many reasons. When we think about controlling and managing our Earth resources, for example, it's clear that we can do this very effectively and very efficiently from space, and this is something that we need to do. When we think of national defense, I believe we need the Space Shuttle and a strong space program for our own national security. The space program gives us lots of products and processes and other innovations that make their way into our everyday life, into our homes, and into medical research labs, and I think that it provides a lot of spin-off, which is greatly to our advantage. We, of course, have, with the space program, made lots of good contributions in the area of communications and weather and in lots of ways, but the basic underlying reason for doing all of this, and one objective which I think we can accomplish very successfully with the Space Shuttle, is to make this a better place and a safer place for all of us to live.
This special report brought to you by NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.